إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا فإنه من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. عباد الله، فإن أحسن الحديث كتاب الله وأحسن الهدي هدي نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة. I bear witness that there is no true deity worthy of worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is Prophet Mohamed sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, his final and his last messenger. O you who believe, have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as he should be feared. And do not die except in a state of submission, in a state of Islam to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. O you who believe, have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say the truth. If you do so, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will rectify and correct your actions. And whoever obeys Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger, he has already attained the ultimate success. The best of speech is the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the best of guidance is the guidance of his messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And the worst of matters are newly innovative matters in this religion, because whatever is newly created and innovated in this religion would lead you astray, and whatever would lead you astray would lead you to the hellfire. Dear brothers and sisters in Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, يا أيها الذين آمنوا يا أيها الذين آمنوا يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا يسخر قوم من قوم عسى أن يكونوا خيرا منهم ولا نساء من نساء عسى أن يكون خيرا منهن ولا تلمزوا أنفسكم ولا تنابزوا بالألقاب بئس الاسم الفسوق بعد الإيمان ومن لم يتب فأولئك هم الظالمون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تجسسوا ولا يغتب بعضكم بعضا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تجسسوا ولا يغتب بعضكم بعضا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اجتنبوا كثيرا من الظن إن بعض الظن إثم ولا تجسسوا ولا يغتب بعضكم بعضا أيحب أحدكم أن يأكل لحم أخيه ميتا فكرهتموه واتقوا الله إن الله تواب رحيم. These are two verses in the Quran from Surah Al-Hujurat. Now many of us sometimes don't pay attention to some of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had told us not to act upon. Sometimes we neglect the fact that if we act on some of these things, that the consequence is that they break the fabric of our society. They are counter to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger ordered us to be brothers. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةً. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam even described this a bit further. He said, مَثَلُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ فِي تَوَادِّهِمْ وَتَرَحُمِهِمْ وَتَعَاطُفِهِمْ كَمَثَلِ الْجَسَدِ إِذَا اشْتَكَى مِنْهُ عُضْوٌ تَدَاعَى لَهُ سَائِرُ الْجَسَدِ بِالسَّهَرِ وَالْحُمَّةِ. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said in the first ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that verily believers are brothers. And the Prophet ﷺ clarified this. He said that the likeness of the believers in their mercy towards one another, in their love towards one another, in their sympathy towards one another, is like a single body. If a part of it is afflicted with an ailment, the remainder of the body stays up in fever. Surah Al-Hujurat, these two verses, and it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wisdom, if He wants to establish something, He would also prohibit things that prevent its establishment. So these two verses in the Quran, in reality what they do is that they prevent us from being able to truly construct a cohesive society. A cohesive society that's filled with mercy and filled with each one of us helping each other. So there's 6 things I mentioned in this verse, in these two verses, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the time to go through them because they're important. Because sometimes we don't realize that we practice this day in, day out. These are some of the fundamentals that discuss the social interactions that should not be occurring in a society. The types of interaction, social interaction between individuals that should not be occurring in a society. Which means you also want the opposite to happen. In the first verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he started and he called upon us, he said, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu. And this is a very interesting way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or an important way, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grabs our attention with. When he says, O you who believe. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud said, whenever you hear, O you who believe, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, then you should listen attentively. Because it's either something that is good for you should perform, or something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is warning you about, you should stay away from it. And so in this case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, la yaskhar qawmun min qawmin asa an yakunu khayran minhum, wala nisa'un min nisa'in asa an yakunna khayran minhun. The first thing we should not do is not to have sukhriya between one another. Sukhriya, which means in Arabic, al-istihza', which means to make fun of, to ridicule a person, to poke at them, to try to humiliate them. This is a characteristic that nobody likes to be done to. And naturally, if such things spread, and unfortunately it does happen quite often, it brings animosity between individuals. You almost have a system of paying back one another. But what's important for us to realize that the underlying ailment or disease that causes us sometimes to ridicule others is arrogance. Kibr. We only tend to ridicule others when we think little of them. When we think we are better than them in one way or another. Both men and females, verse in the Quran was talking to both. لا يسخر قوم من قوم. Generally in the Arabic language, qawm, which means both males and females. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then afterwards says an-nisa, then it means that the first one is referring to the men. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to the men, He said, do not ridicule one another. Do not make fun of one another. And also for the females. The sisters should not be doing this if you are truly a believer. Why? Perhaps because these individuals might be better than you. But first of all, why would you make fun of anybody else? People tend to make fun of people because either their looks, their clothing, their status, their wealth, in many other categories. Their physical appearances. These are things that we find even the youth doing this quite often. And we should catch this from their children to direct them. Because in the end, underlying is that we're doing this because we think that we are better one way or another. But let's ask ourselves a question. Why are we proud of this? What is it the source of pride is giving us? If we're making fun of people's looks, did we create the look that we have, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give it to us? Did we bring our wealth out of nothing, or did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give it to us? Our status was given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our degrees was given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our intelligence, our articulation, name anything you want. There is no single reason for us to have any sort of arrogance towards anybody else. And people sense this, by the way. When you utter a word, saying something to somebody else, they recognize this obviously, especially if it's clear and blunt. The Prophet ﷺ had mentioned in a hadith that we should watch out that sometimes the people who make fun of us are more beloved to Allah than us. The Prophet ﷺ said, رُبَّ أَشْعَثْ مَدْفُوعٍ بِالْأَبْوَابِ لَوْ أَقْسَمَ عَلَى اللَّهِ لَأَبَرَّهُ. The Prophet ﷺ said, perhaps a person who is disheveled, أشعث, أخبر, Ash'ath, another narration, Akbar. Athar, disheveled, which means he does not look that, cleaned up. He's unkept, perhaps because of his poverty, or whatever the case is. However, if he would swear by Allah on something, Allah would fulfill his oath. This tells you that the value of this person that you are ridiculing, that you're looking down upon, in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is greater than you. You never know the internal things. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows them. So perhaps we should be busy with our own selves. We should be busy with our own defects, trying to correct them. There's no reason to be arrogant and ridicule others. That's the first thing we should not do. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَا تَلْمِزُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. اللمز هو ذكر العيب. You can translate it as insulting one another, defaming one another. This act of insulting and defaming one another. What's interesting, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَا تَلْمِزُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. Do not insult your own selves. Although in reality what we're doing is when we insult, we're insulting others. So how is it that we are assaulting our own selves? The scholars said it can be taken as one of two ways. Is that these acts of insult, or mentioning a person's defects, insulting them with them, is not an attribute of a believer. And so when this is acted upon, you're insulting yourself. You're not the true believer that you should be. But some of these other scholars said that it's because when you insult somebody, what they're going to do is they're going to insult you. So by your own hands, you have resulted in your own insult. Similar to how the Prophet ﷺ had told the Sahaba, do not curse your parents. And so they asked, how is it that can somebody insult their parents? They obviously do not live in the age that we live in, so they never fathomed that anybody would disrespect his parents in what way. So they said, how can one of us insult and curse his parents? Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, by him insulting somebody else's parents, and so they would insult and curse his parents. Because your actions, your own actions led to this. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَا تَنَابَذُوا بِالْأَلْقَابِ. Do not call one another names. Now it's not talking about names such as sir or doctor or whatever the case is. No, it's talking about names that an individual dislikes. It's not talking about nicknames that a person likes, or a laqab that a person likes. Ya Aba Mohamed, this is fine. But it's talking about al-qab. Do not call each other names that others dislike. Because it will result in animosity once again. The entire two verses are talking about social interactions that should not be occurring. Once again, it tears into the fabric of our society. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, بِئْسَ الِاسْمُ الْفُسُوقُ بَعْدَ الْإِيمَانِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Bix, whoa, how bad is, or it's the worst of matters. الِاسْمُ الْفُسُوقُ. To be addressed by the name of fasiq after you're being addressed by a mu'min. It's indicating that anybody who does these three acts, all together or by themselves, is actually a fasiq. And how bad of a name you be called a fasiq after you're called a believer. Because true believers do not act upon these things. But only a fasiq does. A fasiq is a person who has went out of bounds, out of the boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rules and regulation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do not do something, he crossed the boundary. It comes from crossing your boundaries. This is what a fasiq is. An individual who disobeys Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. An individual who crosses his boundaries. And so if you are ever insulting an individual, if you are ever calling them names they dislike, if you're doing any of these three acts that were mentioned, then you should be careful because you're not acting as a believer. You are, whether intentionally or unintentionally, causing to the weakness of the Muslim Ummah. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions three other things in the following verses. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اجْتَنِبُوا كَثِيرًا مِنَ الظَّنِّ إِنَّ بَعْضَ الظَّنِّ إِثْمٌ. O you who believe, refrain from, I'm going to translate it as negative assumptions. Assumptions that have no evidences. Negative assumptions. When a brother or a sister does something, you don't know the true facts behind it, or you heard that they have done something without knowing the facts, you start having negative assumptions. This is not something that is permissible. It's contrary to what we should do. We are instructed to think or assume every positive thing about a Muslim until proven otherwise. When you negatively think, have assumptions about an individual, rumors start spreading. Your thoughts in your head start racing. You're not allowed to do this. Because naturally, how would it affect your relation with your brother and sister Muslims? It would not strengthen them, it would weaken them. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَا تَجَسَّسُوا. The tajassus in the Arabic language, it means that you're searching, البحث عن العيب. You're searching for the defects. You're spying to identify the defects or the pitfalls that an individual fell in. The defects that they're hiding from others. The things that they're embarrassed about. And this is something that's interesting that seems very prevalent in our society now. We try to find the dirt about people. We search. We hunt. This is tajassus. وَلَا تَجَسَّسُوا. Do not do that. Prophet ﷺ warned us from this. He said, مَنْ تَتَبَّعَ عَوْرَاتَ النَّاسِ تَتَبَّعَ اللَّهُ عَوْرَاتَهُ. Whomever follows awrat, which means the defects, things that the people are hiding. Whoever tries to search for them and dig that dirt, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will follow that individual's fallings and defects. And whomever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does this to, He will expose him. So this is a warning. وَلَا تَجَسَّسُوا وَلَا يَغْتَبْ بَعْضُكُمْ بَعْضًا. Do not backbite one another. And al-ghiba is ذِكْرَ مَا يَكْرَهُ أَخَاكَ. The Prophet said, he described the ghiba is to mention your brother in his absence or your sister with something they would dislike, even if it's in them. Because if it wasn't in them, then it's a lie. Imam al-Qurtubi said it's kind of interesting. We should look at these verses. Because it's amazing how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us insight about our characteristics. These three things, once you can commit them, most likely you'll fall into the second and the third. When you have a negative assumption about somebody, you will want to search for it. You want to confirm your assumption. And so you start digging up the dirt. You start searching for it. You're spying. And then when you find it, or you find some corroborative evidence, whatever the case is, not solid evidence, what you're going to do with the people around you? Leave it. Have you heard so-and-so does this thing? Have you seen this? I found this evidence is clear-cut, although it's not. And so this pattern of behavior will lead to so many things. Now in the previous verse, I've not mentioned and touched upon it, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about the first three things. He said, بِئْسَ الْإِسْمُ الْفُسُوقُ بَعْدَ الْإِيمَانِ وَمَنْ لَمْ يَتُبْ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ. And whoever does not commit does not do tawbah and ask for forgiveness, if he fell into these three things, then they are from the transgressors. Because they have transgressed upon themselves by making themselves fall into sin and exposing themselves to the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His anger. But they've also transgressed upon the rights of the others because they have committed sukhriyah. They ridiculed others. Or they had called them names or insulted them. The other three, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after mentioning this, وَلَا يَغْتَبْ بَعْضُكُمْ بَعْضًا, especially when talking about the baghdha, the ghiba, backbiting, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us an imagery that tells us how bad it is. أيحب أحدكم أن يأكل لحم أخيه ميتا فكرهتموه. Would one of you like to eat the flesh of his dead brother? Can you imagine a corpse of your dead brother or sister? Their dead body lying in front of you. And then all of a sudden you start eating into it. This is the image that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us. فَكَرِهْتُمُوهُ. And so you hated it. Either you hated the person doing it, or you hated the act of eating the flesh of your brother, Muslim or sister. The Prophet ﷺ, after burying Ma'iz, radiallahu anhu, who has admitted to adultery, and he was stoned to death because of it, two of the companions had mentioned something about him. They said, look at this person. After Allah has concealed him, satarahullah, wasn't it enough for him? Why did he admit it? In the end, he was thrown with rocks like a dog being thrown with rocks. When the Prophet ﷺ heard this, he kept walking until he passed by a mule or a donkey. The carcass of a mule or a donkey, a dead donkey or a mule that has been dead for a while, that his body has bloated to the point that his legs were sticking out. And he called them, he said, you, both of you, come here. Eat from this. He told them, eat from this. And so they said, oh, Messenger of Allah, who would eat from this? He said, you did what is worse than this. By calling Ma'iz what you just mentioned. They didn't think of it. All they thought is this person. Now here's the thing. They thought too highly of themselves perhaps. They didn't realize that Ma'iz had committed an act, but committed also a repentance for this act. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgave him. And now, as the Prophet said, Ma'iz is in heaven. وَلَا يَسْرَقْ قَوْمٌ مِّن قَوْمٍ عَسَىٰ أَن يَكُونُوا خَيْرًا مِّنْهُمْ. Do not ridicule another person. Perhaps that may be better than you. And they committed ghibah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us the ugliness of this act. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said at the end, and he sealed the ayah, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ تَوَّابٌ رَحِيمٌ. Have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Protect yourself from the wrath and the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And do not commit any of those previous acts. And if you do, then إِنَّ اللَّهَ تَوَّابٌ رَحِيمٌ. That very Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is oft forgiven. He accepts the tawbah. He is merciful. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us all our sins. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among the ones who really truly seek to strengthen the bonds of our society. And stay away from the things that would break those bonds in our society and between the bonds of our brotherhoods and sisterhoods. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله. إن الحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. Dear brothers and sisters in Islam, it's very imperative that at the times that we live in, we really seek to strengthen the bond of brotherhood and sisterhood between one another. We will never survive otherwise. Sometimes we are our own worst enemies. Sometimes we do things, whether intentionally or not intentionally. Sometimes we think it's correct. But in the end, what it does, it causes a segregation and separation and a rift in our small society. No matter what we say, we are still small in numbers. We need one another. We need the support of one another. We need to spread the true mercy between one another, the affection and the sympathy towards one another. Those are the true characteristics of a believer, and not the opposite that would bring animosity. Sometimes we commit these acts and not realize it. Anytime we forward a Facebook message, perhaps, or a text that talks about somebody, or pokes fun of a race, or a nationality, or any of these things, you're still making fun of somebody. especially if they're Muslims. The young brothers and the young sisters quite often poke fun at one another for no real reason. And maybe it's because we do not realize the true scale of things. That in the eyesight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it doesn't matter what your degree is. It doesn't matter how good looking you are, or how popular you are, or how rich you are. But what matters is your taqwa, your heart, your fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your acts of worship. Have you obeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger? Do you truly love them so much that you don't want to just obey them? This is what truly matters in the end. And the sooner we recognize this, the better we will become quicker. The stronger as a ummah will become much faster and quicker. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect all of us and to guide us in the straight path. Allahumma اغفر لنا ومنك وأحيي منهم والأموات. اللهم ارحمنا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. نسألك الهدى والتقى والعفاف والغنى. وربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. نسأل العفو والعافية في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم نسألك الهدى والتقى والعفاف والغنى. اللهم أعنا على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. اللهم أعنا على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. اللهم نسألك الفردوس الأعلى وما قرب إليه من قول وعمل. ونعوذ بك من النار وما قرب إليه من قول وعمل. اللهم انصر إخواننا المستضعفين في كل مكان. اللهم انصر إخواننا المستضعفين فينا في كل مكان. اللهم كن لهم ولا تكن عليهم. اللهم اهزم أعداءهم. اللهم اجعل كيد أعدائهم في نحورهم. وانصرهم نصرا مؤزرا. وانصر المؤمنين نصرا مؤزرا. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. وقوموا إلى صلاتكم ورحمة الله.